The perfect control does not require what could be interpreted as some form of transgression, everyone could see themselves in those images of eternal torment. The peasant who took an extra piece of bread, the merchant who calculated a favorable price, the woman who felt a flicker of desire, all could see themselves in those representations of hell. Fear became universal precisely because it was customizable. It was not an abstract threat. It was a vivid and specific prophecy of your own future if you failed to control every aspect of your being. But fear alone could not sustain the system indefinitely. Constant terror is psychologically unsustainable. People eventually become numb to threats that never materialize immediately. Then the church introduced the second vertex of the triangle: guilt. Guilt was the mechanism that internalized control, turning the external threat of hell into an inner voice that never rested. And the mastery of medieval church lay in how it built a guilt system that was impossible to satisfy. The concept of original sin ensured that every person was born already guilty, already stained, already deserving of punishment. No matter how virtuous you lived, you started from a position of moral debt impossible to fully pay. You were guilty for existing, guilty for being born, guilty before committing a single conscious act. This ontological guilt created a constant underlying anxiety, a feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with your very existence. About this inherent guilt, that perhaps you had not confessed completely, that your absolution was incomplete, that some unconfessed sin continued to contaminate your soul. And this uncertainty was functional for the system. It kept you returning, constantly seeking the complete absolution that the system was designed never to truly grant. You were like an addict chasing a high that never lasted, trapped in a cycle of guilt, confession, momentary relief, and new guilt that assured you could never detach from the institution that had created your dependency. The third vertex of the triangle, punishment, operated on multiple levels simultaneously. There was the ultimate punishment of hell, the ever-present threat that gave teeth to the entire system. There were the ritual penances assigned after confession, acts of self-discipline that supposedly purged sin, but actually reinforced the message that you deserved to suffer, that pain was the necessary currency for salvation. And then there was social and physical punishment administered by the church in collaboration with secular authorities. The Inquisition, in its various forms, was the most visible manifestation of this aspect of the system. But reducing medieval punishment solely to the Inquisition is to lose sight of the pervasiveness of the punitive system. Each community had its mechanisms of surveillance and punishment, from informal social pressure to ecclesiastical courts that could impose humiliating public penances, excommunication, which turned you into a social pariah, or in extreme cases, delivery to secular authorities for execution. What made medieval punishment particularly effective from a social control perspective was its public and spectacular nature. Gave could be reinterpreted as evidence of heresy. If she defended her visions, she was a heretic presuming to have direct knowledge of God without ecclesiastical mediation. If she doubted them, she confirmed that she had been deceived by demons. If she refused to answer, her silence was evidence of obstruction and implicit guilt. But what they did to Juana after her initial condemnation reveals the psychological sophistication of the system. They did not execute her immediately. First, they forced her to publicly retract, to renounce everything she had claimed, to humiliate herself completely before ecclesiastical authority. And when she did, when she yielded under the extreme psychological pressure of constant interrogation, isolation, and the threat of a painful death, it seemed she would be saved. Her death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. But then, days later, she resumed the male clothing she had renounced, either because her female clothing was stolen and she had no alternative, or because, psychologically, she could not sustain the betrayal to herself that the retraction represented. This act was declared a relapse into heresy, which under canon law meant she was no longer eligible for mercy. She was executed, burned alive in the Rouen market in front of a crowd of thousands. What makes Juana's case particularly revealing is not only her death, but also the subsequent rehabilitation. 25 years after her execution, after political interests changed again, the Church held a new trial that annulled her conviction for heresy and declared her a martyr. Entirely defined by conformity to institutional dictates. If the Church said that killing Muslims was virtuous, then it was, regardless of how much carnage resulted. And the slaughter was spectacular, not only in the Holy Land, but also in Europe itself. The Albigensian Crusade against the Cathars of southern France was a genocide disguised as a religious enterprise. Thousands of people were massacred, entire cities destroyed, a prosperous culture annihilated. And all this was justified, even celebrated, as the work of God. The famous mandate attributed to the papal legate during the sack of Béziers, when asked how to distinguish between Catholics and heretics, supposedly responded to kill them all because God would recognize his own. Although the exact historicity of this quote is disputed, it perfectly captures the logic of the system. Individual human life was worthless compared to the doctrinal purity of the institution. The punishment could be totalitarian, indiscriminate, because guilt was universally assumed unless you were proven innocent, and innocence was almost impossible to prove when suspicion of heresy was enough to condemn you. But the triangle not only operated through dramatic spectacles like crusades and inquisitions, it also operated, perhaps more effectively, through meticulous regulation of daily life. The medieval church had rules about practically everything. When you could get married, whom you could marry, what sexual positions were permissible even within marriage, what you could eat on certain days, when you could work, how you should dress. This totalizing regulation was not just about controlling behaviors. It was about training people to constantly consult external authorities. Many of these techniques. The criminal justice system, with its emphasis on retributive punishment rather than restoration. Educational systems that emphasize conformity over critical thinking. Work cultures that treat personal ambition as a virtue nation. Their chains felt like life preservers, their prison like a sanctuary. This is the ultimate victory of any totalitarian system, when its victims defend it more fiercely than its creators, when oppression has become so central to identity that freeing oneself would feel like dissolving. The question this story raises is not simply academic. It is not just about understanding a distant historical period. It is about recognizing the patterns that persist, the control structures that have adapted and survived in new forms. In your own life, how much of your behavior is motivated by fear of consequences you cannot verify? How much guilt do you carry for transgressing norms that you never chose but absorbed from your environment? How much of the punishment you experience, whether social, professional, or psychological, is truly proportional to any real harm you have caused? And how much is simply the system reinforcing its authority? How many of your deepest beliefs about good and evil, about what you deserve and what you must do, are truly yours, versus how much they are echoes of control systems installed in your mind before you were sufficiently aware to question? The medieval triangle is dead as a specific historical institution, but its operating principles remain alive, circulating through every system that demands obedience in exchange for protection against threats it itself defines. And the only way to begin freeing yourself is to ask, what do you really fear? And who taught you to fear that? What are you really guilty of? And who convinced you that you were guilty? What punishment do you really expect? And who benefits from you living in anticipation of that punishment? The answers may be more unsettling than the triangle itself.